All right.
Yeah. So you're not in
Okay. All right. So I want to welcome everybody. We have a few guests here today, and it's great, and a lot of Tech Academy students as well. Let me welcome Michael Bibeau here. He's from, can we say where you're from? Or
Yeah, sure.
we can say that he's from Jaguar Land Rover. And I don't know if this is too dark on the screen. No, it looks like it's okay, Kendra. We're excited about having him here. There's a lot that Jaguar Land Rover does, and I'm sure that he's going to explain a little bit about it, but we're excited to have him talk, and welcome.
Thank you. Thanks. Wow. So who's not a student? Oh, wow. Okay, so a good mix. Okay. So when I was asked to come out, I sort of the standard painting over, okay, what am I going to talk about that's not going to put people to sleep? So I'll be using the front row as the gauge. If you guys are falling asleep, I'll switch topics. So let me know if I'm boring you. But I shouldn't, because what I do want to talk about a little bit is, and I will touch on where I work. Obviously I'm not speaking on their behalf necessarily, but I get a lot of experience there. And I'd like to talk a little bit about what I think might be relevant to people who come to the Tech Academy on a Friday afternoon, which is maybe like, where am I going? Am I focusing on the right stuff? Maybe some stories from somebody who's had a weird way of getting to where he is. And then maybe I can also give you some perspective on, because I do hire programmers, which I'm guessing there's a few people in here, show of hands, that are hoping to get hired in the near future. All right, so I'll be speaking to at least half of you. Now, I can't guarantee that I will get you hired anywhere, but what I can tell you is what makes me stand up and take note of a developer when I need a position filled, and what gets them to the table, and then what makes, when they walk away, that I call somebody and go, yeah, I really like that person. We need to do something about that. So I'll talk a little bit about that, and feel free to interrupt me at any time. I think there's questions at the end. I didn't time this out or anything. I threw some slides on here with some good topics I knew I could talk about. So if I'm going long, I have a clock on here that'll harass me, and you guys can also raise your hand at any point, and I'll try to cover them. But we'll have questions at the end too. So anyhow, Mike Bibeau is my name, and I came from a military background, essentially professionally. I got into computers when I was young, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. I went off to the Air Force for 24 years, and then decided that I was getting too old for that. So got out and started a whole new career, and I bounced around a few places from the East Coast and ended up here in Portland. Love it here, and I think that it's perfectly situated between, sorry if there's any Silicon Valley folks in here, but the narcissism of Silicon Valley and the Starbucks, we're smarter than you, Seattle, we're kind of in between where we're cool. Right? Sorry if anybody online is watching from either of those places, but Portland's just cooler. And so I'm not going anywhere. So yes, I do work at Jaguar Land Rover. I'm a software development manager there, and I'll talk a little bit about that as I go. I love hearing stories from other people, so again, I'll try not to glaze you over too much, but I like hearing them, so I figured that might be relevant to some of you. Is okay, great, good advice, but I want to hear what other people do. What's working for them? What's not? What worked for you? And then I'll obviously put my perspective on it, because I did not take the path that you would expect from, that is me, yes. Somebody said Scott Baio earlier? Yeah. You're dating yourself by knowing that, by the way. And a couple years after this, I started getting compared to Michael J. Fox, which you can't tell with that ridiculous hair, but there you go. I went this route to get to where I am. That's also me. So, and that was an interesting way to do it. So, when I found myself having the opportunity to go this direction to get where I wanted to be, I told my wife, I said, look, just let me do this for a while, and eventually I'm going to own my own software company. Eventually. Still not there, but still working on it. And I told her, I said, maybe I'll even stay in and do this as a career. And she stuck with it, and I did 24 years, and I retired in 2011 from doing this. And yes, that is still a lot more fun. I hate to admit it, but like any other athlete, you get old enough that a 9G brake turn starts to really hurt more than it excites you, and you have to go, it's time to go. So I'll talk a little bit more about expectations later, but the thing that the reason I bring up my history is having a long-term aspirational goal and some expectations and managing those, I think has a lot to do with how you get to where you want to go. And again, I'll hit on that. There's so many disciplines in the IT industry. We were talking about that a little bit in the podcast upstairs. In automobiles, we have websites, way too many of them, but we have them for JLR. We have an uncountable number of apps of all varying levels of quality, and so we have app developers for both iOS and for Android. We have again all the different flavors of websites. We have then software that's running in your car, on your screen, on your cluster in front of you. Software actually puts the sound. We don't have, some of our cars aren't even, where it's just old wires going to your speakers. It's digital audio going everywhere, right? Somebody had to program that. Somebody had to program the thing in the speaker to decode that and make noise. We have embedded software in the car that when you press the gas pedal, it tells it, you're not hitting the cable anymore. It tells the engine, I want to go faster. And then the engine has software in it to go, all right, how fast? And let me do that without burning up the engine. And so we have an entire spectrum of software in the car. And, I'm happy to stay around afterwards and talk more deeply about that with anybody. But there are so many options to choose from. And I know the curriculum here is relatively focused in one area because you kind of have to. Or you run the risk of becoming kind of the jack of all trades, master of none. And that's kind of where I thought I might start is, you got to have at least in my opinion, you got to have some sort of plan beyond I need a job. And half the people raise their hand in here, yeah, I want a job, and I get that, but I would say back, why? What do you want to do? What do you want to be? With that knowledge, 15 weeks you guys just spent doing all this, or in the middle of doing it. That's a pretty big chunk of your life to invest in learning a specific set of skills. And every time I say those words, I think of that movie with Liam Neeson where his daughter gets taken. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, Taken. That's the name of the movie. Okay. So I have a guy that I just hired recently, and he graduated. He's going to kill me if I say this wrong. Hope he's not watching. I don't want to say his name, but I think he was OSU. Anyhow, he's been out for a little while. And so he was very recently in a similar situation, and I actually got on a phone call with this guy while I was over in England doing some work. I excused myself from some meetings, and I'm out in the middle of the countryside, and I was walking through a field in the mud in England in nice clothes with sheep around me on a cell phone so I could get a signal just so I could interview this guy. And the reason that I did that is on his resume, he had things like he was in ACM, Association for Computing Machinery. If you're not in it, it's a good organization. I think you get a discount if you're a student. Maybe they'll give you a discount for saying that live. But he was a competitive coder while he was in college. He taught C++ classes while he was there, and he did all this other stuff. And what attracted me about that, why I wanted to talk to him, even though I was not in a great convenient position to do that, was like, what that said to me was that this guy loves coding. He loves problem solving. He loves teaching it to other people. He loves figuring stuff out. And I have to get this guy on the phone because, I need old graybeards who know how to program stuff from 20 years ago, and I need younger folks too who have a different perspective and came through a different path and have learned different things in school. And the reason I tell that story is, he was involved. He was engaged, and it was clear without ever even talking to the guy that he really cared about his craft, even though he was still very new to it, and he still is very new to it. In fact, he came in, and what I hired him for, he's not even doing, because he got poached as soon as he came into a different project that is also very important. And I said, well, this guy can pretty much probably pick up any problem and figure it out. And guess what? He's crushing it. So, again, who else do we hire at JLR? I hire folks that need like experience in real-time operating systems, which I'm guessing is pretty rare to find in this room. Maybe some of you do hardware hacking and things like that. But automobiles, right? They run in real time. If you hit the gas, it better go like now, not 4 milliseconds from now. And milliseconds matter. And when we get into autonomous driving and things like that, they're going to matter even more, right? Because you got your kids in the back. So, lost my spot here. Oh yeah, UX. Guess what? I also need people who know how to program that. I talked about QML. Anybody know what that is? Show of hands. Got one, two people. All right. So QT. Yeah, I don't know how you're supposed to pronounce it. Some of the people who invented it call it QT, which that just sounds kind of weird. It's just capital Q, little t. QML is kind of an HTML-ish kind of a descriptive language for graphics that then can be sort of compiled or translated into C++, which can then be compiled and all that kind of stuff. So it's a way to do all that. Because in a real-time system like an automobile, you can't necessarily, we're starting to go a different direction, but you can't necessarily just put web pages up for your speedometer, right? Because if any of you have ever been to websites that have the little thing loading, right? Websites are great, they're not always the most efficient code. I wrote Jim and Jay. Oh yeah, and I have guys who need to know how to like pull out hardware and plug in chips, and when you plug in the chip, now plug in a USB cable and figure out how to talk to that thing that they just built from a terminal and make it wake up and make it do stuff. And you can't click on a UI with a mouse. You have to do all the Linux commands and all that stuff. And so that's the kind of folks that I'm looking for. And I usually say hire talent, train skill, especially with what we're doing, because if you're a problem solver, which I assume if you've made it through this course, you've proven that. Right? But you're going to have to also, at least where I am, be able to take that problem-solving skills and become, going back to this, kind of a launch and leave weapon for me. I use a lot of air combat analogies just because I can't help it. So you'll have to forgive me that. But Tim, and I just said his name, I'm not going to say his last name, he is that. And so that's why I bring that story up, is I can take this guy, and I've only had him for a month. And I am pretty confident right now I can go, there you go that way. And I'll check on you in a couple weeks, and so that's what I'm looking for, and that's what I mean when I say hire talent. Somebody, there's another version of this that says hire character, train skill. If you care, I can teach you how to do anything. Well, not necessarily me. There's a lot of guys that work for me know stuff that I have no idea what they're doing. I just kind of go, oh, that's cool. I act like I know what I'm talking about when I talk to some of them, but then I walk away and Google it. I make sure nobody's watching when I do that. I'm like, what was that guy talking about? So anyhow, but yeah, and I said, like, you must be a launch and leave weapon, but there's some competencies that I think specifically, from my perspective and what I do, that are going to help. Anybody in here a DevOps person? Is that a subject that we talk about much here? Show of hands if you've ever done DevOps. It's not really something you do. It's more of a way of thinking. Nothing. Okay. I'm going to talk about that for a little bit because I promised I would talk about some stuff that I think is important that maybe you haven't heard before. So if you think of DevOps as a set of methodologies, development, operations, mash them together, you get DevOps. There's a new buzzword that's out there now called BizDevOps, right? Anybody ever do you guys do like agile process or any of that kind of stuff when you do your practicals or any of that kind of stuff? Okay. Do you use things like Jira, or what do you guys use for Jira? I see some. Okay. So imagine you're writing your code and you spend all this time writing your code, and then you go and you make and you build it all. Now I'm talking about like C, C++. You compile all this code and you go put it on a USB stick or something, and you go put it into a box and you deploy it onto that machine, and then you turn on the machine and nothing happens. And there's no UI on that machine. You have a command line that you've plugged in from a laptop, nothing. Now what? All right, how frustrating do you think that is? And you guys are doing a lot of .NET and some distributed stuff and all that. This may apply to some of you guys doing that stuff too. So DevOps basically is, I have developers now that sit at their computer, they write their code. You guys use Git?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So you're halfway there, all right? And so they commit to a branch in Git, the latest change that they made, and when they do that, in their commit message, there's a couple things they type. It adds some notes to the story in Jira, potentially even closes out that task. It kicks off a build pipeline that goes out and in real-time live gets the latest dependent libraries from whatever it is that they're working on. And we keep those in Artifactory, which we always keep the latest libraries of everything. And when you commit something, it goes through the whole build process until it has an executable binary done, and it does all that in an automated fashion and runs tests on it. Do you guys do unit testing in your code when you're doing this? Another thing, right? I got guys who come in and don't know what unit testing, they don't know how to spell it. And I'm like, all right, go figure it out because you're doing it. And what that means is 5 years from now, when somebody has to go in and make a one-line change to your code, and they redeploy it and it goes through this build process, it's going to run through all the same tests that you did 5 years ago, right? Because your code's going to live in a car for 20 years, right? And some of the code that you're going to write in Microsoft products is going to live longer than that, right? Microsoft, whatever your opinion, they're not going anywhere, which means .NET ain't going anywhere, right? So whatever your opinion, it's going to be around for a while. So if I have to come maintain your code 10 years from now, you don't want me to hate you. That's what DevOps is trying to do. And here's the other thing that it does. It makes my developers efficient, right? Have you guys ever heard fast, cheap, good, pick two? Right, it's a big Hollywood saying. Well, I say pick three, right? And the way that I do that, the only way to pick all three is to reduce the drag on the aircraft, right? Flush up the rivets, get rid of the cruft, whatever you want to call it. And the way you do that is by learn DevOps. At least understand what it is. Right? So when you go to your first job and they're asking you, hey, have you ever committed to a CI pipeline? You're like, what's CI? You can't do that. Because if you don't have something in the phone screen when I talk to you, I'm probably not going to have the time to have you come down and talk to me in person. So that, and again, this is just me. Realize I'm saying this from my perspective. Because it's very important to business. It is a business value issue. It is something that brings us better software quicker, higher quality, less money, all that kind of stuff. Because if you're not constantly thinking about the business value of the code that you're writing, you're probably doing it wrong. And you're probably going to end up not being a good fit for where I'm working because I'm in a business. And I got to sell cars. Not me. But people like over in the UK and China and like a zillion other countries. So it's a big deal. I would recommend you go look it up. API building, service building, that kind of stuff. Anybody do that kind of work? Okay, a few. Everybody's connected nowadays. If you're writing code, probably somebody else's code is going to want to talk to it. Right? So if you don't know how to do that and make your code so that I can pick it up and pull it down from a repo and understand how to talk to it and make our code now better, you probably need to, read up on that too. So, there's a huge difference in DevOps even between, hey, I made a real estate website for someone to sell their house, and I've just deployed code for a real-time embedded system to control the transmission on a Range Rover. And I want to make sure that, Johnny and Mary in the back in their car seats don't get in an accident. And the process for doing that, I might have on a website, right? People are clicking on the website while I'm deploying code to it. I better not screw that up. Who's been on a website where suddenly you're like, dude, what happened? right? Yeah, because some developer somewhere probably pushed a bad thing to prod, and the website goes down for a few minutes, and bells and whistles, and there's a helmet fire going on somewhere in the world while they try to fix it, right? And the next day, somebody is in someone's office, and they're going, dude, you realize that we lost $1 million for the website being down for an hour, right? And it's real. So when you're doing it for a car, if I got to spend a month to push my next code change to test into the car, and that doesn't work, now what? I got code from 40 different developers in there over the span of a month, right? And now it doesn't work. Who broke it? Back in these days here, story time, F-22. All right, I was in Okinawa. I'm sitting on the flight line, and I was the operations officer, and we were hosting the first, I can talk about this because it was all in the news. We were hosting the first international deployment of F-22s to Okinawa, which is within stone's throw distance of China, so do the math. And the first two went across the international date line, and the jets shut down. All right, anybody know why? It was a mistypecast variable or something that was not initialized properly. I don't know the exact details of it, but it was a typecasting problem and an initialization problem of a variable that caused all of the crypto in the jet to dump. Shut the jets down. We had to turn 24 airplanes around, go back to Hawaii, and spend 2 weeks fixing them all. Right? That was one line of code from some dude somewhere sitting under fluorescent lights going, oh, I got to go to soccer practice tonight. Yeah. I mean, think about that. What you're doing is important, and it's becoming more and more important. And that's why I said earlier on, have a plan. Have a plan where you want to go, and understand the value of what the code is that you're doing, because that will make you more, well, it'll make you get a job with me if you're interviewing me, because I'll figure it out if you don't care. And I'm sure other guys will too. So, cars, coffee machines. I got a guy working for me right now, and he's older. He's in his 60s. Right? And this guy he could probably take apart that projector and turn it into something else in like 2 hours. It'd be a little robot walking around. He's one of those guys, you're like, how did you do that? And what he does right now is I give him a bunch of Raspberry Pis, and we have these things that we test software on, and I'm like, hey, we're manually updating all these things all over the world. Can we just make them all talk to each other? He's like, yeah, I can do that. And give him a couple of Raspberry Pis, and guess what? He's doing it. And I didn't have to do it. I just said, could you go do that, please? And he's like, yep, not a problem. Business value, right? If I don't have to have a line of developers standing there with USB sticks to go plug it into a test rig and test their code, and then I can keep all those rigs configured the same, right? I'm making more money because I'm wasting less. All right. I stole this slide from another talk, and I was given to a bunch of veterans about, trying to figure out kind of a similar thing, figuring out where you're going to go. I use the orienteering as a thing, like, hey, you know where you're going to go. Anybody ever do orienteering? Yeah, so what do you do, right? You go, I want to go to that mountain. You shoot an azimuth, and you don't always get to see the mountain while you're walking towards it, and you don't sit here and follow your compass. You go, in order to get there, I need to go to that monitor. And when I get to that monitor, I'll go, check the map, and I go, okay, now I need to go to that rock. Uh-oh, there's a river. Going to go around the river, and then I'll figure it out. And that's really how I see it. That's why you guys are kind of here, right? Or the ones that are students, and even the folks that are here that aren't students, you're here because you're trying to figure out something, get some nuggets from somebody else. And I don't have the answer necessarily, but maybe I'll say something that you'll go, oh, you know what? I can apply that this way, right? And that's really all I'm hoping for. But here's the thing on getting a job. You got to get an interview, right? Because if you don't get an interview, you're dead in the water. And so if you can get at the table with me, you're more than halfway there. Right? And I think that goes, because even when I was looking for jobs before I got the one I have now, I just went through the same thing. I've only been here less than 2 years, my current job. And as I was doing that and I was going around, there were several places it was like, I could crush that job. Never got a call back. Nothing. Just crickets, tumbleweeds, You know, and I'm actually still kind of bitter about a few of them. I'll save that, but you know, because I'm reading the job description, go, yep. You know, I'm just checking all the boxes and going, okay, man. And I wrote a cover letter, you know, explaining them exactly how I'm going to solve their problems. No, only to find out now that our hiring software system is sometimes a little hard to navigate, and which means that sometimes I do the same thing to other people without realizing it. And so, what does that mean? That means a couple things. Pack your own parachute. You know, I can't remember the guy's name. He hosts Family Feud. Yeah, Steve Harvey's. He had this like viral video. He was talking about, you know, you got to jump, right? And he was talking about, you know, jumping off the cliff. And my wife was like, oh, you got to watch this video. And I'm like, okay, that's great, but pack your own parachute, right? Before you jump, which means I'm not just going to jump. I call that the America's Got Talent syndrome, right? Where they sit up there and argue with the judges. What do you mean I'm not a good singer? You're not a good singer. I'm experienced at this. I'm telling you, you're not good at it. Listen to me, you know, and have a backup plan. But point is, be honest with yourself, kind of a thing, and know where you're going, so that when you come in and we're like, hey, you need to work on these things, you can do it. I have just as much trouble as the next guy taking feedback sometimes, because you just want to walk away and go, yeah, you're an idiot. And then usually I'll go home, calm down, and think about it. So for me, I'll give you a couple of examples of how I did this. I retired from the military, and I went to a company called CACI, which used to stand for something, and then they got tired of explaining what it stood for, so then they just changed the company name to the acronym. So then it was just CACI. It was weird. I have a master's degree in computer science. I have a master's degree in military art and science. I have a couple of other professional things from like Darden Business School and all that. I'm like, but they're like, yeah, we don't care. You haven't coded in 20 years, you know, and got paid for it, you know, so what do you bring, right? And so I said, oh, okay, well, I'm not going to apply as a developer, because what I am good at, because I was an officer in the Air Force and was always given problems to solve, what I am good at is business analysis, right? And I can talk a good game, I can sell stuff, I can write charts and flow charts and all that, and I understand what the engineers are talking about, even if I can't sit down. They were doing SharePoint, which I was like, okay, we did SharePoint in the military. So guess what I did, though? I had done a bunch of SharePoint work in the military. Oh, if I even like logged into a SharePoint, it was on my resume, right, when I applied for this job. And I got hired, or I got the interview. Right? I got hired because the interview went well. I did not get hired because of my resume. My resume got me a seat at the table, right? And I did that for 6 months, because as soon as I did that, I started looking for another job, right? And I found another one, and I did the same thing. And the point is, I didn't know how I was going to get to where I wanted to get, which was kind of going up through this path and kind of getting to where I am now. And maybe someday I will have my own company. But, you know, this is kind of the expectations, and I got a slide on that here, and management of yourself. Then I went to Northrop Grumman, which was the next one, and same thing, right? But here's the deal: they had a contract going on that was with redefining the Air Operations Center and Command and Control for the Air Force. And I went, oh, I did that during the war in the desert. That's what they're building, and they needed a computer guy. I had zero experience with systems integration. Got hired as a systems integrator. Right? I had no idea, you know, what they were doing, but I understood the product, I understood the point of the product, I understood the value of what they were building. I did hours of research on Northrop Grumman and could tell them the history backwards and forwards during the interview. And then I understood, you know, how that weapon system was going to be relevant to and they brought me in as a systems engineer, and then immediately made me start doing business development. And I was doing sprint reviews. We call them sprint reviews, but they were more like demos to the customer. You don't normally do sprint reviews in a suit and tie. And this is a true story. They built me a $300,000 briefing room, a little bit bigger than this, with lights, and they had Hollywood guys come in and design this room, right, just so that I could do demos of this software that I knew nothing about. I'd been there a week, and I was doing my first demo. Right? But I knew all the lingo, I knew all the stuff, and that's how I got the job. And then eventually I did actually learn the technical stuff. So it wasn't, you know, I wasn't a total scam. And then I came here. And I got a job with a web development company. they were mostly design. Anybody go to Design Week Portland? Design Week Portland? All right, the lady who runs that, you know who that is? Yeah, Celie Pines. She was my creative director at this place, and came in. They wanted me to help them with some stuff from technology, forward-looking innovation. It was all kind of that. I never built a website. I had never written a single line of HTML since 1994, and I had a website called Virtual Mic that I hand coded in Notepad on a Sun system that somehow was still operational until just about 4 years ago. Yeah, it lasted almost 10 years, almost 20 years. Jeez, take myself. Anyhow, but again, it was about understanding the value I can bring to them, and that's how that worked out. So, and then finally to JLR, and I got the job that I'm in. Well, I got the job I'm in now because of the previous job that I was in. I started out as the QA strategy guy, and the discussion that I had with the guys there was, I used to be standardization and evaluation for the United States Air Force, which means I was in charge of all the flight regulations, and I was the guy who went out and gave the general his check ride to say that he could still fly, that he was safe. Which means I understood process, I understood enforcement, I understood quality assurance type issues. Still don't know, I haven't written a line of C code probably since my master's degree in '95. So the point that I'm trying to make to you, though, is find with your skills the value. And then I put these pictures up here. They're kind of a metaphor, but my son took them, so I just put them up just to throw them in a bone. But I say, when it's dark, you have some stars to navigate by is kind of the line that I put against this. So my last job before JLR, doing at the web company, great place, loved all the people. It's actually rated in some of the top places in Oregon to work. But everything that they said they hired me for, they had decided to go a different way, and I was miserable because I ended up doing project management and making phone calls to people who wanted websites. And I was like, that's not really what I signed up for. So I started looking. And here's how I found JLR. I'm a member of a little bit over, well, I have 87 on my slide here, Meetups. I think it's 88 now because I joined this one. And there's about 18 of them that I actually have been to at one point or another. I don't go to all of them regularly. I go when hey, this is a new relic. They got good food, and it's a great looking topic. And it's something that I don't know anything about. I got my current job because I went to an Erlang meetup. Anybody know what Erlang is? Show of hands. One guy. Erlang was the language that all of the telecom industry was built on. Right, and it's this type of a node-based. I don't know Erlang, so don't judge me if I get this totally wrong. But it's this kind of node-based language where the nodes, if they go down, can auto-correct without crashing the whole system. Right, and it's how your phone call doesn't get dropped when one of the call centers or the little switching boxes crashes. It just gets rerouted, and then that thing reboots, and then life is good. Well, guess what? There's this thing called connected car, where you want to connect all the vehicles on the road, and you can't have cars rebooting while you're going down the road, right? So they were doing meetups. They were talking about stuff. A lot of open source work going on with that, with all the auto companies, right? Everybody needs to do it. And if we can all share some of that stuff with security and the base parts of how that works, it's just good for everybody. And then all of us auto manufacturers can have a good, solid front. And then we can take the 20% on the top and go do our thing. Right, and put our brand on that, knowing, because if we all try to build the perfect hacker-proof car and we all try to do it independently, we're all going out of business, right? So they were doing an Erlang. I'm like, I don't know anything about Erlang. I'm like, I'm kind of tired. My wife said, you know what, you hate your job. Well, I didn't hate it. Sorry if anybody from there was watching. I just wasn't being fulfilled for what I wanted to do. It's just, she made me, thank God for my spouse, she made me get dressed because I had been to the gym. She's like, nope, go take a shower. And I came downstairs and, I'm wearing the standard Portland, shirt. She's like, no, go put on a better shirt. And I'm like, yes, ma'am. And I went to the meetup, and it was actually super interesting, right? I was like, wow, I never knew this Erlang thing of which you speak and this connected car stuff, and this is really cool. And they gave a demo, and I was standing next to this convertible Jag, and they were showing all this cool stuff. I'm like, this is awesome, right? And the guy at the end goes, oh yeah, and we're hiring, right? So I went, they were free food, so I went back, got a couple beers, and I walked up to him, and I went, I want a job. That's seriously how I started. I handed him a beer, and I said, I want a job. And he goes, all right, what do you do? And I said, nothing. But I have a background in quality and blah, 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 blah. This is my background, and I do have the education, and I'm willing to start anywhere, right? Because I want to do what you guys are doing. And he's like, all right. Just this morning, I posted a job for a quality assurance guy, and then I went back to this my military background and spun that whole thing. And that was on a Thursday. I was interviewed next Wednesday. The Wednesday after that, I was hired. The point of the story is not really about me. It's about for you. Get out there, go to stuff that you're not comfortable with, that you haven't seen stuff. If you can't have the conversation, you know what I mean? And it's fine if you just want to, I'm just going to do my thing here. Then don't get mad when there's not a lot of jobs available, is all I'm saying, right? You got to get out there, you got to do stuff. So I go to the Unity ones. I know they're here now. I actually haven't been to the last 3 or 4 just because of my new job. I'm just gone too much now. I go to the VR meetups, the ones that they've now moved that whole thing. Kent Bai kind of handed that over to somebody. He's like in podcast land now. And they're all at New Relic, which means good food, free beer when they don't tap the kegs during the day, which I'm not. You get there at 5 o'clock and the kegs are tapped. I'm like, what are you guys doing all day? And what else do I go to? I go to the HoloLens one. And actually at the HoloLens one, they gave what I thought was free. Then I had to enroll in like a community college class and pay a bunch of money. Did it anyhow. And it was a class, like a 24-week long thing for like 3 hours a week. And I went down after work and we built a floating transmission thing for the community college automotive program that was a cooperative HoloLens project where 2 people could sit there in the thing and you could stick your head in the transmission and all the gears are moving. It was really cool. I did not have time to do it, and I did it anyhow. It was painful. I go to Future Talks because, right, if you want to be on the cutting edge, you better be able to point to where it is. I mean, it's really that simple, right? I say that at work all the time. If you want to be innovating at the cutting edge and you can't point to it, then why are we talking? And I go to Pig Squad, too, just because it's fun. Anybody go to Pig Squad? Portland Independent Gaming. So the guy who leads it is Will. He's got this, like, giant ZZ Top beard, and he's just super nice. And it's fun. They do a lot of events, and they're pretty active around here. Because, you know what, I want to understand what's not happening as much as I can understand what is happening. Just like, hopefully you guys have learned some trouble or bug, techniques for finding bugs about figuring out what the problem isn't, which typically I find, right, with tracking down bugs in code, which again, I don't do much of. But I do know if I eliminate all the things that aren't broke, probably what's left is what is broke, because if you just Google that, you're never going to figure it out. But I want to figure out what's not happening, right? Because if it's not happening and I'm thinking about it and I can't find anybody doing it, there's an opportunity. And it led me to that. 1, 2, 3 game jams in 3 years. The first one I did, I was on Kent Bai's team, and we did a VR thing called Facing Death. And I showed up. I knew absolutely nothing. And my only contribution was, we should make a thing where like you wake up and you're about to die. That was it. That was my only. Oh, and at the time we did it at the Art Institute downtown, and I lived across the street in the Louisa. And we got there, and the guy's laptop could not run the Oculus because it was a DK set. And so I walked across the street and brought my computer over and my monitor, and that was my second contribution. And then we got 5th place in the world for that. For VR experiences. And I knew absolutely nothing. I watched a guy who had left Google. He was a brilliant coder. His name is Corey. I don't know if he's watching, but I can't remember his last name. Anyhow, I sat and I just watched this guy all weekend. It's a 48-hour thing. I actually went home and slept because I was across the street. These guys didn't. But I brought him back some food. That was nice. I watched this guy code all weekend. Because I didn't know how to do it, I wanted to do it, and now the company, the guy I was telling you about earlier, we're doing all the stuff, we're doing all that in Unity because of that engine. And then the next year I did one on my own, and that's my buddy there. And we did it through Google Hangouts, kind of like we're doing here, because he's in Florida. And so I just made him stay up at weird hours, and we did it. And then this past January, I finally got him to actually fly out here, and we both did it in person. Point, again, of the story is you got to do stuff, right? Because if I were to own a company right now, it would be a gaming company. So why would I not go to game jams? Even though I kind of suck at them, you know, I'm learning the other people, and I'm learning what people aren't working on, and I'm learning, you know, what are the things out there, and it's just fun, right? So I put this one up here again just because my son took all those pictures, and you know, it always makes me proud to use his work. But the point of it is, there's a ton of summits beyond the summit out there, right? And you know, I like the kind of the orienteering analogies and stuff. And you might get to where you're going only to realize, hey, I can suddenly see this other thing that's cooler, right? But if you live with the fear of missing out of those false summits or those other summits or whatnot, then you're not really focusing on what you're going to do. And again, that's going to show up. And I wrote down here, I said, so how do you get me to hire you? I covered that kind of riddled throughout, but you got to have some skills that showcase your talent, right? You could be the most talented person in this room, but if you don't have some actual skills, I might still want to hire you, because I did say hire talent, train, skill, business value, right? I don't necessarily have the time. That's why these great places exist, right? There's a bunch of these around town. That's why these guys are all going, yes, that's why we exist. Because you got to have something. You got to bring something to the table, right? I'm bringing a paycheck and a cool job. What do you bring, right? But I have a guy right now, and I hired him through an agency, showed up, older guy, real reserved, you know, a little bit, you know, almost seemed like scared of his own shadow kind of a guy, but super nice, you know. And I was like, oh man, I don't know about this guy. He's got the resume, and we sat down with him. So I got him in because his resume was good. And we sat down, and my chief architect and I were just like, oh, I don't know. I mean, I worry a little bit because he's very reserved and all that I'm not going to be able to do that launch and leave thing where he's not going to go out and tackle something. And I'm going to have to be constantly, you know, giving this guy care and feeding. And I already don't sleep much, so I'm not sure I have the time for that. And for about 2 weeks, that was true. And what that reminded me of is that everybody's got their own rate at which they get there. You know, some people get there a little slower. Some people dive in and they realize that they're maybe being a little reckless. This guy right now is 4 months ahead of schedule on the stuff that I gave him to do. Right? And he is now defining all the unit testing and doing all this other stuff for all the other developers. Right? And so he did it because he had the resume, he got in front of us, and he said the right things. He didn't have the personality and all that kind of stuff. So it's not about that. Well, if you get in front of the right people, hire them, I guess. So I like that story because, you know, sometimes I need it now, right? And I wasn't sure this guy was doing it, you know, but he got spun up quick, and I'm quite sure that he hasn't told me, but I'm quite sure he was up late for several nights in a row his first couple weeks learning some new things, but he learned it. And by contrast, I brought in another guy who I hired as kind of a team lead, technical lead, who has just so much experience in so many different things. I'm like, how could I not hire this guy, right? And that one was just an easy one. He came in, he had all the stuff in the resume. We started throwing, you know, I have a chief architect throwing all these questions at him, and technical questions. And by the way, in an interview, I don't do this as much just because I've already admitted to my tech proficiency is not as high, but my chief architect is a hardcore hacker, right? Him and I were flying back, sidebar story, him and I were flying back from the UK, and he had all of the requirements for a project that we're working on all done in YAML format sitting in a GitLab repo. And I'm like, that's great, but nobody else can read those, right? And I said, you have until we land to get those imported into Jira. So he paid for a Wi-Fi connection. It took him 6 hours, and he wrote Python scripts and imported 900 requirements from YAML into Jira. And I was like, you're awesome. And it kept him quiet for the entire flight. So, totally forgot where I was going with that story, but it was just funny. So, Oh yeah, I was talking about my guys. So guys showing up who just can do stuff right away. With you got to know my company when you come in too. By the way, I've interviewed some folks. You come in, you go, hey, tell me about what you know about Jaguar Land Rover. You guys are the open source. No, we're not actually anymore. Did you even look at the website before you came in? Don't do that, because that's the first indicator that you are not a launch and leave web. You didn't even have the common courtesy to look up my company on the internet before. I did the podcast before, and they started asking me questions, and I'm like, wow, they actually went and studied my LinkedIn profile, and that was just for a 5-minute podcast, right? If you can't put in the effort, you're not going to get much further than the introduction. And I've actually cut one interview short because the guy had to read his own resume when I asked him some questions. I'm like, so tell me about this thing. And he was like, I'm like, all right, dude, we're done. We're done. Sorry, I got more important stuff to do than this. Know what your value is. Know what you've done. Know why it's important. Know why it's important to me. And what you bring to the table. And the stuff you guys are learning here, right? Figure out, how does it apply? Because it does. Oh, I did a thing where I was problem solving. I solved these problems, and that is going to be important to you guys. And then be polite. Just be polite. Let me find you online. Don't be an idiot when I find you online. Because I will find you online. Because I want to do my homework. I just said you have to do your homework before you come to an interview. Well, guess what? I am going to as well. Because that's common courtesy. All right, last thing I'll talk about, because I think I'm about at my time limit here. And then I like to frame a lot of stuff just by this: expectations and observations. The closer together those two things are, the happier your life is, right? The closer together my expectations are with my observations of you, the happier your life is. Happier my life is too, because I don't have to now spend time getting up people's cases, because I don't like to be that guy. Somewhere in that space in between, right? This is a old fighter pilot thing, right? You always brief to perfection. You always debrief to perfection. So I say, we're going to go out, we're going to do this today. We go out, we're going to screw up 1,000 things because it's really difficult what we do in the air. We come back, we reconstruct it with the best accuracy we can, and we write it all down. And I've gone out at times and done a 45-minute flight and spent 7 hours talking about it afterwards. Right? Because it's the only way to make this space smaller. Right? And you guys are doing some of that here. Right? And so remember, your expectations of what you expect from me better be clear to me, right? Because then if you show up to work and your observations are not, then you're going to have a miserable time. So make sure you do your homework. The other thing here is, are your observations of yourself matching my expectations and observations of you? That kind of stuff, right? And this is all just basic human, like, be nice to each other kind of stuff, right? But, I had a guy, I had talked to him right before I came over here, and it was, hey, I think there might be some expectations disconnect here, and I hope that that's not the only problem. So I only bring this up to say, don't live down here and let that space turn into, just I don't care. And here's a bunch of crappy code and self-doubt, and I'm arguing with people all the time because their observations do not match mine. And I'm doing what I call the AGT syndrome, where I'm arguing with the judges. Be honest, learn from it. And anybody ever see the movie Glenn Ross? Right, always be closing. I'm going to change that to always be committing. Always be committing. I think somebody else, I might have stolen that from somebody. I probably heard it at a meetup, one of those 87 that I belong to. But always be committing, and that's the thing, because if you do that, you're always providing value to what we're doing. So with that, I will say there's only 2 ways, right, that you can see further down and see what is over the horizon. You either got to walk the path or you got to climb an altitude. So the way I look at stuff like this, and I'm sure some of you have thought about this. Oh, it's code school, not a degree. Well, you know what? I don't care. I honestly don't care. Right? Most of my best developers, in fact, the company I came from, 0 college graduates in the development department. Everybody was from code schools and stuff, and they were awesome, right? I don't necessarily need an engineer who can explain to me how to rotate a binary search tree in order to build a website that has a beautiful response time in Ruby on Rails. You know what I mean? So again, know where you fit in, know your value. And you know, the climb and altitude thing really is, right? You stand on other people's shoulders. You can see a little further. You get an education in whatever. You get some skills. You can see a little further. But then you got to go, I'm going that way, you know? And Mike's desk is in the way, so I guess I'm stopping there for an interview. And the faster you go faster. That's another flying one, right? That's engine performance and turbofans and so all that stuff. And that's what I got. And I think I probably went a little bit over my time. Apologize. It was about 49 minutes, I think. But questions? Yes, ma'am.
I was reading recently about how some police agencies are concerned about infotainment in the vehicles. How are you going to deal with the people with distracted driving issues? Because we just had a law that was passed.
The no phone law, yeah?
You can't talk on your cell phone while driving now. Things like that.
Yeah, so you can't look at your Google Maps on your phone, but you can look at your navigation system on your center console.
Well, I just wondered how you would answer that and respond to a question from police agencies who are concerned about distracted driving vehicles because they know you're developing this infotainment.
I would answer that a couple ways. We have an entire building full of UX professionals that have printed copies of the National Transportation Safety Board guidelines for human-computer interaction within a vehicle. We do testing in simulators. It's one of the facilities I own that has a full-size Range Rover in it and wraparound video and like 9 zillion cameras in the thing so we can see where people are looking. And we have a whole bunch of researchers who look at all that stuff and they go, and we make them drive while they're doing it. Right? And we're getting better and better at this. We make decisions based on data. And we let the data drive, let me use the right word here. The data informs the design. And so we have to come up with better ways to not do what you're saying, right? A perfectly organized information architecture, right? Like you guys have seen, Amazon. Beautiful information architecture, but you got to go like 400 layers if you navigate clicky, clicky, click, right? So what does everybody do? Well, what I do is go to the search bar. It's kind of like it takes a lot of work to make something that simple. And so in the car, we have to figure out ways that I can get directly to what it is cognitively that you need to do next, right? And make sure that the car's paying attention to you so that thing's available. It's in context, right? Things like when I search, I can't really type on the keyboard while I'm driving because really it's against the law. It disables it in most vehicles, and we do that. We disable certain things. I'm sure you guys all have one where it's like you can't do certain things. You got to pull over. It's really annoying, right? And there's actually a whole subculture out there of people who hack through that stuff, to make it so they can do that. I'm not sure I completely answered the question, but research, observing.
Well, it would help, but I think it would be really interesting if you would get the
Great idea.
Just for your fun of it.
Mm-hmm.
Just because, the concern of officers and people distracted.
Absolutely.
It would just
I wouldn't be surprised if we've already done that, but I will ask. Yes. Yes. While they're pulling someone over for being on the phone.
Exactly.
They also have their full laptop.
Yes.
Another thing too is that with all the technology that has been added into the car, that could potentially distract you. You also have adaptive controls like that actually help take some of that load off.
Yes. Yes. Things like the collision avoidance, and these are stepping stones to autonomous driving, right? And there's depending on which organization you talk to, there's either 4 or 5 levels of autonomous driving, with the highest level being, I can take a nap. And how do you deal with that? How do you, I would take nothing else because I drive down Burnside from the West Hills to go to work every day, and I would take nothing else but something that would just make me not hit the car in front of me because I don't use my phone. And it's funny because I flew jets. I don't text and drive because I know how stupid it is, right? And I know that unless there's no other cars. But I might even hit a deer while I'm texting and driving. It doesn't matter, right? But I would just love to have something that made me not run into something. And then I would maybe be able to do some email while I'm stuck on Burnside for 20 minutes in the morning. But now I can't. So I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say what you were saying along the user experience perspective is, that's where things like voice and whatnot.
Yes.
I've been working with some of the voice skill stuff, and what you're saying was like Google or any kind of like UI that has multiple like a menu.
Right.
When you do something with voice, they have a natural way of doing it where you basically can say one sentence and it parses out to exactly down to that point. And I think it's a similar thing with the safety systems that you're talking about. They're not 100% perfect, but they kind of get you steps closer to being able to slow down the car or stop in time without it totally taking control of it.
It's a great point.
Those two together, you get a good middle ground before you get to the real time.
When you talk to your Alexa or your Google Home or whatnot, how does it know what you said? It goes out to the internet and it parses it on a server somewhere. When you're in your car, do you have an internet connection?
Not always, no.
Exactly. So these are problems that we have to solve. And again, I throw these out there to say these are the problems that we need. That's why I'm hiring coders, right? Because how do I solve that? I can't put all that software in your car. You know what I mean? Because it's too much. Or can I? I actually don't know the answer to that question, right? If you are disconnected, right? Google, the best thing Google's done in years is make offline maps. So that when I go out to the UK and I need to find a pub, I'm not sitting there walking around going, my phone won't connect, I just download all the offline maps and off I go, and then I just delete them when I go home. So it's a great point because it brings up all these other, again, to relate it back to folks in this room, all these other disciplines that I need just to have voice search work. The UX person that does the information architecture and figures out how to do it in context, and when I say, Michael Jackson, am I mean Michael Jackson for the media player, or I got a buddy named Michael Jackson, do you want to call him? How do it know? And does it ask me back? Does it ask me back in text, or does it ask me verbally and distract me? I don't know. So, yes. Yes. Yeah, I think a couple things that I did mention in there. The first one, if you're leaving here, understand DevOps. Right? I mean, not all companies are using that. It's a thought process. It's a methodology, but then that translates into a way of working. And if you don't understand that, we're going to have a tough time working together. The other one, I mean specific. You're talking the second part of the question. I'm sorry. Oh, yeah. Okay. For me, the answer was Meetups. Right, and that is quite honestly, it was a good year and a half when I first got here. I was going to 3 or 4 of them a week. I was like that dude in Fight Club, right? Going to all the support groups, And it's because I got here and I had no clue. I had just come from a giant government contracting job with a $400 million budget, doing horizontal systems integration for a top secret weapons system. I had no idea what was going on in the real world when it came to technology. So I said, all right, got to figure it out. And you got to do something concrete. I said earlier, if I want to be in the innovative space and eventually own my own company, blah, 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 I got to be able to point to the edge. Where is it? What are people doing? What are they not doing? What's cool? What do people think is cool that is actually kind of just the latest stupid thing? Because there's a lot of those out there too. So, yes, sir.
I had a question for you. So, I know you share about the time zone. Since it's written down, I'm assuming that this files are very
Yeah. So, that's a great thing about robustness and backups and understanding risk. and understanding what is the implication if your code sucks. Because sometimes people do it by accident. It's not like some dude was sitting there going, here, watch this, Somebody just, it slipped by. It could have slipped by code reviews. It could have slipped by peer review. It could have slipped by a bunch of things. Because I'll tell you what, testing code is hard. It's really, really hard to reproduce. The only way to really test your code is to deploy it and put users in front of it, because they're bang on it like monkeys, and they're just, and you're like, oh crap, I never thought of that, So testing it before you put it there. Now, what those guys actually did do is they actually sent 2 F-22s across the date line, because like, hey, we've never done this before. And the guys who owned the code base, they knew that their test suites had not been able to properly test for that position or that situation, right? Because it was mixed up with a whole bunch of other stuff with geolocations and crypto and all this other stuff that they didn't have access to in their test facilities. The only way to test it was put it on, turn it on, see what happens, right? And so you need to know when that's the case too, right? So they said, all right, we're going to hang back here. The other 22 jets, we're hanging. You guys go and let us know how it works out. And the 2 guys, they went across a certain, the engines didn't shut down. It's just the avionics. So they just dead stick or manually flew it back. But yeah, it's a great question. Yes?
You talk a lot about hiring talent and developing skills.
Mhm.
For you as a hiring manager, what on a resume gets noticed as far as talent? Because I can present my resume with my skills and how many years of development and all that, but I'm not sure how to showcase my
Some of it is creative writing, quite frankly. Right? Just like when I got that job, my first job, they needed a SharePoint. Right? My involvement with SharePoint is I had configured a bunch of the sites as a user while I was in the military, because I was sick and tired of wasting time looking for stuff. And I knew I had enough tech chops that I kind of could figure it out. But you know what? On my resume, oh no, I was a SharePoint developer. Now that's not, you don't want to lie, because that's, you know what I mean? Because that's also going to be just as bad. But there's a difference between, there's a big difference between I have to be exactly what it says, and showing me how whatever it is going to create value for the thing I'm looking for, right? I know how to configure and build all the SharePoint sites and do the information architecture, and I know how to do all this stuff. Now in the interview, and that's what I said on my resume, in the interview, do you know how to do .NET coding? Nope, not a clue. Because I don't. I do now, but at the time, I just finished flying. So you have to kind of pick the pieces, right? Read the job description. You have to be able to infer what does the guy need, or lady. I'm sorry, I'm using the wrong pronouns here, but what do they need? How do my skills solve that? And now the talent part is kind of ambiguous, right? It's I'll take the case of the young guy. I knew this guy had talent because he was teaching other students C++ as an instructor's aide, or whatever they call it. He was competitive programming in the ACM and winning competitions. Those are things that go, this guy sounds like he's got some chops here. That's not a great answer, but talent's kind of ambiguous, right? It's subjective.
Well, I guess kind of what I'm getting at is informers were mentioning I put in the
Yes, because your resume is about you. Your cover letter is you speaking to me, and you should take all of the stuff that I don't care about out of your resume, because I get a lot of them. Last guy I hired, I own the audio visual IT guys, and they do all of our screens and everything, and all our facilities and everything are all networked. They go through Crestron, and so I have to have guys that know how to program that, kind of like what we're doing here, to send video over Ethernet to all the places and do all that. And I completely lost my train of thought there where I was going, but this guy, that was a great story. I was going to say, I've had such a long day, I completely lost it, but he came in and he looked good on his resume. He had all the skills, and he came in, and the thing that made me hire this guy is he said, I know how to make one-button briefing rooms. So you walk in and you just go, boop, and everything goes, whoosh. And I'm like, oh, dude, you're hired. But prove it to me. Oh, and I know, I was talking about cover letters. On his resume, he had all the things, the boxes checked, right? He put a cover letter. And by the way, as I was going through our hiring system, I won't say which one it is because I don't like it. I don't actually even engage with the ones who didn't put a cover letter. And the reason is because for this particular job, and I just remembered where I was going with this, I had 450 applications. Okay, I already work way too much not reviewing applications, right? So imagine, put yourself in that situation. How do I look at yours? Is talk to me. Doesn't have to be a long diatribe. I got an attention span of a gnat, right? So, 2-3 sentences. How you solving my problem? Dude, I can do this, I can do this, I can do this. I really want to work there. I love cars. If it's for here, don't completely BS me because I'll figure it out in the interview. Does that kind of answer what you were saying? I mean, you speak to me with the cover letter, but use one because your resume is talking about you. Yes, sir.
I want to add to that. You also want to be careful not to always just be speaking to what maybe you want to hear. You want to be true to yourself too on
Yes.
who you are as a person, and you want to make sure that it's a match for both ends, and that you want to be happy and grow, and they bring you for you.
Absolutely, and I totally agree with that, and that's why I say with that letter speaking to me, where you get to cherry pick your skills and show me how they're relevant to you. And in the interview, if you're not interviewing me just a little bit, because I wrote that in my notes and I didn't say it, is ask questions. People who come in and be like, you got any questions? No, I'm good. Like, you want to know what the work day's like? Hey, is it, I mean, don't necessarily ask me, well, how much you paying? Because we'll get to that one later. Yes?
I was going to just further what you're saying, and back to what you were saying about having a plan or a vision of where you're going. I think the cover letter is speaking to you, but it's the start of a two-way conversation. Actually,
Yes,
right?
absolutely.
Just the resume, which is a flat about you, right? So
Yeah.
it should speak to what the company needs, but it should show that it's aligning to your career passion goals, like whether it's to work in healthcare or something that is passionate to you versus just the next job.
Absolutely, absolutely. And as I look back to the jobs I didn't get calls back on, and I think about that, and I go, I probably could have covered that. I could have done something different with the cover letter, and I go through that thing I was saying in the learning space in the middle. So, okay, why didn't they call me back? I clearly didn't get their attention, and maybe because I'm a little bit older, the old ways of doing things, people are, now I get resumes. I'm like, wow, this is new. People are doing things a little different. Resume formats are different and all that stuff, and people are figuring it out. That might be part of it because I didn't, like you said, I didn't grab their attention.
Invested in that particular opportunity versus another.
Exactly.
But what you're saying is, to you as a reviewer, you automatically see that if somebody went through the trouble of writing a cover letter, that's one extra effort than just the resume.
Absolutely.
And then if it was written well and actually is well thought out, then that kind of really kind of draws you into it. Then it's a conversation of, okay, we're actually doing this.
It's kind of like I said earlier with the troubleshooting. I figure out what the problem isn't. If I got 400, I need to make 2 stacks. The ones I'm actually going to read and the ones I'm not going to read because I don't have time. And it's an easy thing to go, no cover letter, see ya. No cover letter, see ya. Maybe I passed up the perfect candidate, and that stinks. All right, but the real world, there's only so many hours in a day, right? I wish I could do it better, but that's what you guys are going into if you're looking for a job. You got to be able to get your talent in front of somebody, and the way you're going to do that, you can only really showcase me your talent when I'm talking to you. Because it's kind of this fuzzy, ambiguous. You could show a few examples of it, but your skills, yep, check, yep, got it, check. Because that's an easy one, right? Real time. The guys I'm looking for now, C++, yep, check, Git, okay, CI pipeline, okay, this guy's used Jenkins, but not a big deal. We'll teach him how to use the new one. Check. Okay, all right, I'm paying attention to this person. Cover letter. I do a phone call with a lot of folks before I bring them in. Hey, it's a great conversation. Right, and if you say something in the conversation that's about technical, I do this. Oh, well, tell me about that. Tell me about the commands you use to do that Git rebasing. And I have no idea what the answer is, but it doesn't matter. does the person on the other end of the phone at least have an answer? If they said they were good at it, right? I shouldn't have said that in public. The jig is up. Anybody else? Yes, ma'am.
You touched briefly on the education, but review in particular didn't matter as much as long as the do you feel like that's across the board?
Yes and no, and I don't. There's a whole probably another 4 hours of discussion there, so I'll try to keep it brief. But think about other disciplines. Let's go mechanical engineering because we have a lot of mechanical stuff on a car. The guy who designed the engine so that the stroke curves and the efficiency and all that kind of stuff is all perfect and the math all works out does not necessarily know how to fix that engine. He probably doesn't even know how to build it. He might understand how to build it and be able to do it in CAD, right? But with some exceptions, there's a good chance that some of those engineers can't go into a garage with all the tools they need, milling machines and raw materials, and build that engine. They'd be like, right? Give that guy's design to a brilliant mechanic who knows how to use all the tools, is skilled at them, and is just a craftsman, right? May not know all the Fourier transforms and the math and the linear algebra that went into it. Doesn't need to, right? And so I see that in computers there's the same thing. You need the whole spectrum, right? I need the computer science nerd who's given me the math on how to figure out if I'm an ON or ON squared algorithm and blah, 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 and efficiency and, machine learning and AI and all that. You need that person. But I also need somebody who can sit down and crank out a web page that doesn't suck, right? And knows JavaScript and knows the difference between the latest JavaScript. We had one recently, and a JavaScript programmer fresh out of a code school, and she was building an app for doing sports and things like that. And we put it in the actual car, and it crashed. It was working everything else. The difference is that in the car, it was a slightly different environment, that it was a previous version of JavaScript that didn't understand. I'm sorry. I don't know the version. There was like one thing she was doing. It was like an assertion type of a thing for getting assets from, because everybody gets all their assets off of like Amazon S3 and stuff like that. It was like a promise or a JavaScript promise or something like that. Anyhow, it was new to. We didn't know. You know what I mean? So she she didn't understand how to do the troubleshooting. I had to bring in other people. But the whole idea of, I needed some like nerdy engineer guy who knew the hardware and knew all that stuff to help out, the coder who was great at JavaScript. You need them all, if I'm making my point, and so, can I answer the question? I tend to ramble. It's Friday and I'm allowed to do that.
Do you feel for somebody who is career changing and starting out, do you feel like you would then need to get a career like that, maybe too overqualified for somebody who's not even doing
You get a degree if it fits your purpose. I went and got a master's degree because I love computer science. I love sitting down and doing, I have all the books, and I subscribe to the ACM magazines. I love reading about algorithms, and I'm totally nerding myself out here, but I enjoy that part. I'm probably way better at that than I am at coding, right? If I had my son is a brilliant coder, and I love sitting next to him because I spout theory and then he makes it happen, So, and I'll give you a sidebar story. My wife, she owns her own store. She's a great designer. She has all these people just love her to death. And her first boss, way back, I took my wife to my high school prom. We've been together for a while. But her boss said, because she wanted to go to art school. He was like, that's the dumbest thing you could ever do right now because you are a good designer. You just need to come here and I will kick your ass for the next couple of years and it'll be cheaper because I will pay you, right? So it depends. Depends on what you're doing. Depends on what your goals are. I mean, I know that's kind of an ambiguous answer, but I don't think, I've seen people with all the paper on the wall who couldn't code their way out of a paper bag. And I got guys like in my last company who went to a 6-week code school and were brilliant Ruby on Rails developers and understood the DOM backwards and forwards and could do anything with a web page, Depends. Anybody else? Sir? Ma'am? Yes. And that's why I talked about DevOps earlier and business value. Because in the old days where I had to spend months and months and months writing a bunch of requirements, throwing them over to a vendor, having bids and all that kind of stuff, and we've made the sort of mistake that we think we know what the final product is, right? Which is not agile. What I'm trying to do now, and this was my predecessor that started this, not me, I'm picking up the ball and running with it. With the DevOps thing, I can bring things in-house, right? Because now the risk to my having it in-house is a lot less. I don't have to rely on some company to build me this big thing and then come in and be like, here you go, and magically I can just go, hey, you know what, guys? In fact, the project I'm working on right now, the guy, my chief architect that I mentioned earlier, we were in a meeting and there was this program that was, people were like, hey, we don't know what we're going to do and what vendors are we going to use? And he kind of went, hey, we can do that in Portland. I'm like, well, we don't really have it figured out. He goes, yeah, don't worry about it. We'll figure it out. Right? He came back and he's like, hey, guess what? I just signed us up for this project. I'll design it. You're going to build it. And I went, and that's why I just hired a bunch of people. I just hired a whole bunch of people recently. Because I'm like, all right, how am I going to build it? He goes, I don't know. You figure it out. So he signed us up for this thing. And here's why he did that. Because now we have control of it. We own the core. We own the IP. We own it. I am not beholden to anybody. And if this works, vendors are on notice. If you don't do it well, we'll do it better. Right? And then we'll just stop hiring you. So I think that you got to bring core things in-house. You got to bring the core of your product, the core of your business, the core of your business value. You got to own it. And then you can outsource all of the frosting and the icing and the, that stuff. Does that kind of answer your question? I mean, I think you do it. You have to own your IP, right? A lot of companies are like, they focus on patents, and we have a lot of those too. And somebody told me, they said, we don't necessarily focus on patents because we want to prevent other people from using it. We focus on patents because we don't want anyone to prevent us from using it.
When it's combined with what you said earlier, it's not that you're not using third parties, right? You're using some open source elements.
Oh, yeah.
But you're bringing all the final integration in a continuous environment in-house and owning the kind of the secret sauce on top and the finish of the product. So you're not relying on somebody to deliver you a self-contained entertainment unit that they just kind of demo to you.
Because now it's not fit for purpose, and now what?
Everything is tied together, and if you can reuse components across them, you're selecting the kind of the subcomponents from third parties sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Totally outsourcing the fit.
Absolutely, and virtualization is also in there, and I'll back up a couple of jobs. At Northrop Grumman, this big project that I was working on, what we did is we took a building, a command and control building, that had 260 different servers from 260 different vendors running all the different command and control systems into place, and we virtualized all of them, including the network hardware. And we brought in a couple of these Dell Flex Pods on cranes, which was just a contained thing. It was about yay big. We had like 3 or 4 of them. We took all that stuff and all those cables, right? Gone. All sitting in this box, and now they're trying to take all that and do this, DevOps and all this, bring that stuff in-house. And again, I lost the second part of my thought there. But, anybody else? All right. Yep, one more.
Questions on resumes and
Yeah.
How far back
Well, that's a great question, and there's a bunch of people that are like pros at managing resumes and stuff. And I'll kind of go back to a couple things. First of all, just to clarify, never lie on your resume, but focus on your strengths, right, and make them pop. Get all of the stuff that I care about up top, up front. I remember when I did my first resume coming out of the military. I sent it off to one of these places that help veterans kind of make the transition. And the guy's main thing was like, dude, put your security clearance at the top, because I still had a top secret clearance, which cost like a gajillion dollars for the military to get somebody. He's like, put it at the top, and get it down to one page. Nobody cares what you did at the Air Force Academy, right? At this point in your career, nobody cares. And he said, those last couple of jobs you had, you couldn't have got those if you didn't do all that other stuff. So they're not going to read that, right? And even when I look at guys' resumes, if by the time I get to page 2, you might be checking off boxes of the skills I'm looking for, but if they're old, I'm like, the guy's done real-time operating systems, but it was 7 years ago. It might not be real proficient. Now it's a judgment call, right? I think the popular advice, I think you guys have folks around here that help with that, but I think it's like, hey, no more than 2 pages, no more than 10 years. I've heard that. I look at the last 4 years, right? Because there's nothing we're doing now that we were doing 4 years ago. It's just not. Anybody else? Cool. Wow, that was fun. Thanks. It's getting kind of hot in here. This projector's like bacon.
Before you guys head out, thank you for coming. We appreciate it. If you'd be willing to do a survey about the experience today, we'd really appreciate it. We'd love to hear it. And even if you've been here before, we still like to get your feedback on this specific topic. So, thank you again for coming. And if you have any questions, let us know.
Yep. I'm on LinkedIn. You guys can look me up. Just make sure you put that you met me here, because I get a lot of things that I'm just like, not deny.
I'd absolutely agree with that. I'm planning to move to Michigan, so it's looking to be closer to my wife's family. And I've been applying for jobs. I'm currently an IT technician, Plus certified, Project Plus certified, working on Linux Plus certified. And I've got absolutely nothing back from any of the jobs that I applied for initially, which is what I was thinking. Maybe I should look at the other side of this and start doing software development.
Yeah.
But how can I get over that risk factor where they're looking at this guy who's currently living in Portland? I say I'll fly out immediately because I have that money, I have that flexibility right now, but I don't think they believe me.
That's a tough one, because I get the same thing. I get guys from all over, and they're like, oh yeah, I'll come out, and I'm like, yeah, that's awesome. I got like 8 guys that are like 2 miles away from me that are all the same.
Yeah.